Hello and welcome to The Print. I'm Snehesh Alex Philip. Well, a lot is happening in India's neighborhood, that is India's immediate neighborhood, that is between Pakistan and Iran. So about 2 days back, you had seen the surprising attacks by Iran on, what Iran claims are Iranian terrorist holdup in Balochistan. They accuse Pakistan of providing safe havens. Well, that's not a new accusation for Pakistan. And today, early morning, you had the Pakistanis retaliating with their own aerial as well as missile strike on what they claim to be our Pakistani terrorist holdup in Iran, who found safe havens in Iran. What is really happening between the two countries? Both are Islamic countries. And to carry forward this discussion and to understand this whole geopolitics and the security angle, I have with me my old friend. Old in the sense, and he is very young, but old in terms of the number of years that I've known him, is Wajahat Khan. Welcome to The Print once again, Wajahat.
Good to be back, man. How are you?
All good. Thank you so much. Straight to the point. What is happening between these two countries?
Okay, so I think we have to really put a psychoanalysis hat on, right? Because as you know, you obviously know that the relationship with the Indians has had a clear trajectory. There's been outward hostility from day one with very, very short periods of normalization and then outward hostility. So that border and the problems with the Indo-Pak border and the LOC has been dealt with either through all-out war or some very high level of diplomacy. Okay. The other borders have a more complicated relationship because both of those, the western borders, they're around the same size. They're around 1,000 kilometers each, more or less, the Iran border and the Afpak border. But the Iran border gets a special pass, especially in the last few years, because the Pakistanis have, through some sort of a mechanism, through some sort of a committee or a flag meeting, or some sort of other device of discreet diplomacy, the Pakistanis and the Iranians have figured out their border issues, which are just like all the other borders. There's smuggling issues, there's terrorism issues, there's militancy issues. This is Pakistan after all. There are issues with all its neighbors. But the Pakistanis and the Iranians have figured out some sort of mechanism over the years to not openly castigate, criticize the other side. The Iranians have fired across the border, but they've been low-level responses across the gate. The Iranians have conducted even small mortar fires across the gate. In fact, there's even been reports of a small, teeny, mini drone strike inside Pakistan's territory, but the Pakistanis have never really made a show of it because they've been working with the Iranians for this common problem, which is the Baloch insurgency. Now, the Baloch insurgency in Pakistan, as you know, has a very different secular root. The Baloch insurgency wants an independent Balochistan. It's very Che Guevara-esque. It's even got some sort of a communist or a socialist bent. It's very left, so to say. Now, you as an Indian know that that's a very different sort of insurgency you guys have in your Northeast versus your Northwest, right? Yeah. The Northwestern insurgency is very Islamist. The Northeastern insurgency is very not so Islamist. It's basically like that. It's basically the same thing, that the Pakistanis face a very secular insurgency in Balochistan. Meanwhile, across the border, the Iranian insurgency from the same folk, from the same Baloch, the Iranian insurgency has a very right-wing Islamist, Sunni, Salafist bent. Yeah. Both of those insurgencies have been getting stronger through the years. But again, both sides have figured it out. This came out as a shock to the Pakistanis because forget all the other communication channels. The Iranian foreign minister had just met the Pakistani prime minister.
Yeah, they were in Davos.
They were. 24 hours before that, the Pakistani foreign minister had met the Afghan special rep, the SRAP for Afghanistan, which also, by the way, houses, according to Iran, not according to the Martians, not according to the Indians, not according to anyone, but according to the Iranians, that the Afghans also house the same group. Said, why would you attack Snehesh? The world's fifth largest military, the world's fifth largest country, the world's only Islamic nuclear power. Clearly, there's a calculus here beyond border security. There's a calculus here by the IRGC beyond just, we're just responding because you house the bad guys. Well, guess what? They've been housing the bad guys for years. And so have you. And you've always figured it out. So why now? Why have you bracketed? I'm asking you to think about this from an Indian perspective. Why would Iran bracket Pakistan in the same parenthesis as Iraq and Syria? Now, Iraq and Syria are one could argue they're Iranian proxies. They're smaller powers. Why would you mess with the big one? Because for some reason, they thought that the Pakistanis wouldn't respond. For some reason, they thought that the Pakistanis are internally weak. If you look at it from the outset, yes, the Pakistanis are weak these days. The Pakistani economy is on its knees. The internal crackdown against civil society, Imran Khan, has really polarized the society. Elections are about to be delayed. There's a lot at stake. The country is not doing well and hasn't been doing well for a while. But that doesn't mean that the country won't come together and defend itself. And it seems that the Pakistanis have done this. I'm quite pleasantly surprised that the response has been proportionate. The escalation has been staggered. They waited for the Iranians to apologize through a third party. That was through China. The apology never came. The Iranians acted like they usually do. They acted like Iranians. But I think in the end, both sides gave the other an out. The Iranians said, hey, you guys are brotherly. We respect you. We only hit the bad guys over there. The Pakistanis took their time and said the same thing. They said, hey, we respect you too. We only hit the bad guys. We didn't kill any Iranians. We only kicked Pakistani terrorists. So the response has been proportionate. They've given each other an off-ramp. And I hope it stops here.
You made a very interesting point, and that's something that I'm really trying to understand, because right now Iran is in midst of this whole war that has broken out in the Arab world, in the sense that between Israel and Hamas, you have the Iranians, the Houthis backed by the Iranians taking on the Americans, taking on the Brits, and targeting ships not just operating in the Red Sea, but also in the Arabian Sea, and it has forced the Indian Navy to deploy about 12 ships. Of course, the Pakistanis have also gone ahead and deployed ships, given not to fight piracy or anything, but given the fact that India has built up there. So Pakistan would like to do it. But in your sense, what was really Iran thinking? Because as you said, this is a problem that has always been there. And there's the same group which was used by Pakistan to get Kulbhushan Jadhav also.
Right. Different schools of thought there. So again, both sides have hunted with the hares and, run with the hounds. Or is it the other way? Right. So both sides have sort of confused. It is confusing, isn't it? Because both military establishments in both countries have very little parliamentary oversight. They have very little civilian oversight. They're not very transparent military establishments. They're not answerable to anyone but themselves, if at all, right? So the rest of this analysis would be very like, what is the ISI thinking? Or what is the IRGC thinking? These are not very... they don't have Wikipedia pages, these organizations, where we can figure out, what the new, 2024 strategy is. But overall, one can tell you that the Pakistanis have been, again, they've been toying in this crisis, in this larger Middle East crisis. If one were to have a template, the Pakistanis have been behaving more or less like how the Saudi and the Emirati camp has been behaving. The Pakistanis have not allowed flag burnings of Israel, which always follow a flag burning of America or a flag burning of India on its streets. It's a natural cascading effect. कि Israeli flag bhi jala do, Hindustani flag bhi jala do, American flag bhi jala do, तीनों साले jala do, right? So the Pakistani, right? So they haven't allowed those protests. Sure, in the masjids on Fridays, the mullahs do have their khutbahs, but beyond that, the Pakistanis have not allowed people to really, beyond social media, to say much about the war in Palestine. That's a very Arabist, GCC type of move, that the spillover shouldn't come on the streets. In fact, the streets of New York and Chicago are more unstable than the streets of Pakistan right now when it comes to protesting against Israel, right?
Yeah.
Beyond that, the Pakistanis have done follow the same template as the Arabs, as its GCC allies when it comes to diplomatic channels, when it comes to talking at the UN, when it comes to backing South Africa at the International Court of Justice. It's exactly the same thing. So the Pakistani messaging has not been the Iranian messaging. The Iranian messaging, as you know, is, hey, fiddle around with Hezbollah here, fiddle out with the Iraqis there, fiddle around with the Syrians here. The Pakistanis have been very non-fiddlish in the last few months. In fact, the Pakistanis have been playing second fiddle to, in a way, the Indian Navy. This hasn't happened either. They're part of the same task force, and the Indians have been leading this naval patrolling exercise. The Indians have been sort of in the Western IOR, Indian Ocean region, and the Arabian Sea. Your Navy is leading that effort. The Pakistanis are backing it up in their AOR, in their area of responsibility. This we saw happen in just the last couple of weeks. So the Pakistanis have, in a way, worked with the Indians, the Americans, the Brits, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and everybody else for this theater. Yet, because they have very close proximity to Iran, and the theater seems to be expanding into the Indo-Pacific, which there's been a lot of literature on, a lot of reporting on. The Pakistan is the western edge of the Indo-Pacific theater, so for Iran. So I guess this had to eventually happen. The theater had to expand. We saw the Israel-Palestine theater expand into the Red Sea theater, and the Red Sea theater now expands to the Arabian Sea theater. So the theater had to, and I think this was expected, but not in the way the Iranians have conducted it. I think they've conducted it quite dramatically, and they failed.
Well, true, but just a correction there. India patrolling is not part of any international naval grouping. What India has said is that they're operating on their own. But I agree, there is a tacit understanding between multiple players involved in this region, because no country can do it alone. But at the same time, India is trying to steer away from being part of any coalition, because if you get into a coalition, then you're in direct conflict with the other players who are involved in this whole situation. But what is interesting today was a tweet that was put out by the Afghan government, by the Taliban government in Afghanistan, which actually issued a message asking both Iran and Pakistan to hold their horses and not escalate the situation and indulge in violence. I found it really funny.
It's a little rich, because the Afghans have a hand in this as well. Keep in mind that the insurgent groups that Iran has targeted, Jaish-ul-Adl, they have the same Deobandi narrative which the Taliban have. Keep in mind that they are not just anti-Iran anymore, that the Jaish-ul-Adl, which the Iranians have nicknamed Jaish-ul-Zulm, meaning the army of cruelty, not the army of justice, the Jaish-ul-Adl have now started operating against Pakistani targets, and in fact have entered into joint operational alliance with the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP. And keep in mind that the TTP are cousins of the Afghan Taliban. In fact, the Afghan Taliban have given haven and refuge and training and weapons and freedom of movement to the TTP. So that it's a little rich for the Afghan Taliban to just advise on Twitter for people to take it easy, when it's their responsibility since 2021, since they've taken over. It is their responsibility to make sure that their country is does not allow these other groups to fester. However, to your earlier point, there is an Indian angle. It will be dragged in. It is being dragged in by analysts who are either a little too creative or a little too cynical. The Indian foreign minister had visited the Iranian leadership just around the time
on Sunday and Monday.
Not pushing any conspiracy theory here. Mr. Jaishankar didn't go and say, Assalamu alaikum, sir. Kaise hain aap theek thak hain, attack kar dein. Obviously, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that at all. That's not what I'm saying at all. And yes, the Indians have been very clear about making sure that they're in no sort of coalition here. But back home in Pakistan, Nobody's forgotten about Kulbhushan Yadav, the Indian naval commander, who, by the way, had an Iranian passport when he was arrested, who, by the way, was arrested when he was detained or taken or kidnapped. There's so many versions of what happened to him.
By the same terror group that was targeted by the Iranians.
Right. And by also, through another narrative, by the ISI's X-wing, So there's a lot of there's a lot of stories out there. But he was taken from Chabahar, which, by the way, is an Indian and Iranian joint port. So Chabahar, which is seen in the Pakistani worldview as a counter to the Gwadar, right? So there's an economic story here as well. You've been more friendly with India than us story here as well. There's a Shia Sunni, unfortunately, I have to say, there's a Shia Sunni tension here as well, which for centuries there's been tensions between these two sects of Islam. So premised on that, Snehesh, this is a culmination of years of passive aggression, the Iranians being a little too proximate with the Indians, the Kulbhushan Yadav Jai Shankar connection, and all of the above. It's quite fun to analyze. It's quite scary to analyze as well.
Well, the Twitterati, at least on the Pakistani side, are having a field day by coming out with various conspiracy theories. But today, the Pakistani Foreign Office also had a field day. The Indian Foreign Office had a field day yesterday when it came out with a statement, a very cleverly worded statement by the MEA, and which takes a nice swipe at Pakistan. It says that it understands actions that countries take in their self-defense. So today at the press conference, the MOFA spokesperson, Ms. Baloch, also used the same expression by India to take a dig at India and wonder whether India now supports Pakistan in the fact that actions that countries take in their self-defense.
I'm telling you, everybody, all the diplomats and the analysts in the region are going to have a field day. The best part was yesterday that the Pakistanis said the exact same thing that the Iranians had also said. The Iranians had said, you're a brotherly country. The Pakistanis said, you're a brotherly country. The Iranians had said that we respect your sovereignty. The Pakistanis said, we respect your sovereignty. And then the Iranians said, but we will do whatever we need to do for national security. The Pakistanis said the same thing. It was amazing. It was a tit for tat diplomatically, but I think it allowed everyone an off-ramp to de-escalate. De-escalation was baked into the escalation. Paragraph 1, we kill people. Paragraph 2, they're not your people, they're bad people. Paragraph 3, we love you, let's move on. Both sides effectively did the same thing. I thought that was smart diplomacy from these guys. I finally figured out what we've been paying these diplomats for a while. So that was great.
I swear, and that's a fine touch of diplomacy that you can really, kill or abuse each other with a smile. And I think that's the best part of diplomacy there. Wajahat, while we talk about all this, there's one another issue that I really wanted to know about. And this is my inquisitive me. When the Balakot strike happened, there was always this whole talk of Dusra Banda, where the Indians and the Pakistanis also did Dusra Banda kind of a dialogue. But now there's a new word which has now come into Pakistan and the Indian media reports, is the unknown, the unknown gunmen, the unknown. So who are these unknown? What is happening in Pakistan that, if I go by social media reports, it is as if, every wanted terrorist in Pakistan, for years who've been hiding in Pakistan are suddenly dropping dead. And some of these people, which names which come up on social media, I'm actually clueless and I end up making 10, 15 different calls to people to wonder who these people are. And even they don't know when these names come up. But some of them are genuine people who are dropping dead one by one. And the blame is, on the unknown. So who are these unknown?
Bhai, we've been calling these unknown Namalum Afraad. You guys are only getting used to it now. Right? We've had a name for them for years. And I'm afraid that this is when your audiences must know that this is the part of the state's apparatus which it would rather not own. Right? This is the part of the state's apparatus that Saif Ali Khan is not going to be starring in this mini-series for Netflix. It's not going to happen. Nobody's going to write this script. Nobody's going to get these rights. I must say, this is beyond the cynicism and the satire. we must really figure out where the Indian security apparatus has been headed in the last few years. Clearly, India's beaten Pakistan or anybody else regionally besides China as an emerging conventional military force. But at the same time, and the Indian National Security Chief Ajay Doval has a lot to do with this ideology. The very fact that within the last year and a half, Snehesh, we've seen these men, all of them have been in Pakistan, but affiliated with different groups which are on India's hit list. Hizbul Mujahideen, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Khalistan Commando Force, Al-Badr Brigade, name one. It's almost like a menu items of all the fast food restaurants you want, McDonald's, KFC, Burger King, Domino's, all of them. Won't leave anybody behind. Everybody's invited to this party, but they've all been dropping off. From Karachi to Quetta to Kohat, they've been dropping off. Somebody's gunned down in front of a mosque. Somebody's gunned down at home. Somebody was sitting at their shop. It's the making of a beautiful...
Well, even within the mosque itself.
Right. It's the making of a fantastic Bollywood blockbuster, or for that matter, a Hollywood blockbuster. But there's a sinister side to this as well, because the sinister side to this expands all the way into Vancouver, where the Indians have been blamed by the Canadians to have done something similar. The sinister side comes all the way here to New York City, where the Indians are under investigation for the same allegations made by the FBI. So this clearly seems to be some sort of surreptitious operation headed by some sort of Namaloom Indian agency. There's been no ownership of it. Either it is a Namaloom Indian agency or it's a Namaloom agency of some organization which seems to have the same people that India doesn't like on its kill list. Either ways, this operation seems to be around 18 to 24 months old, roughly. It's been executed with a ferocity in Pakistan that we haven't seen. The MO has been quite similar. Small arms used, ex-servicemen, ex-cops, disenfranchised or angry cops used from third-party countries, neighboring countries, men who know the area, live in
what
another
you're
country.
trying to do is name Afghanistan. Indirectly, what you're blaming on the Afghans.
No, not at all. No. People have been shipped in, according to my intel, people have been shipped in from Sharjah, Abu Dhabi, people who are ex-cops there and are driving a cab there, but are well-trained. So here I am, a cop, ex-cop from Pakistan's special security police force, elite force in Punjab. I know I have weapons training, but now I'm a taxi driver in Sharjah, right? And I'm not obviously happy, and I miss the good old days, and I have some sort of a problem, and I'm recruited by a Namaloom / Indian intelligence service, and now I go back and shoot people up because I don't care. I don't have any stakes. The recruitment has been interesting. The arrests that have been made in Pakistan are also interesting because these guys have links. People have been killed inside their jails. Snehesh. This goes really deep, right? Forget a mosque. Jails have been penetrated as well. So this goes really, really deep. And it's the making of a fantastic Bollywood blockbuster. I will happily work with any Indian director for it. But less cynically speaking, I will have them write the script up because I've been following the story. But it disturbs me. It disturbs me because this is something we've seen on the other side. We've seen Pakistan do this to itself. We've seen that when a security service, when the apparatus takes over and is not in the name of patriotism, in the name of nationalism, and is not transparent, and is not clear, and is not democratic, and doesn't have a clear mandate, and breaches law, and takes the law into its own hands, and is not answerable to anyone, then we know what that does to a society. While this may be very sexy for some Indian watchers and viewers, that this is a show of India's new nationalism, India's pride and joy, the research and analysis wing or its special forces operators or whatever are doing this from behind the scenes. Namaloom Afraad are now in Vancouver, they're in New York, they're in Karachi. All of this may sound very sexy and appealing at a nationalist level, But I'll tell you what, state apparatuses have to be controlled and contained. There has to be civilian oversight. There has to be, the people need to know who mandated this, who's paying for this. And I think that's something which we paid for in Pakistan with a heavy price. And I hope that doesn't come to India.
Well, I'm sure it won't come to India. The fact is that there is civilian oversight here for the armed forces or for the intelligence agencies. But given the fact, I'm just, and this is something when I discuss with people here also, and they keep pointing out to one thing, is the fact that most of the people who are dropping dead suddenly are mostly people who, India wanted years ago. People who India is probably no longer interested in, while all the active ones continue to be active in Pakistan, the ones dropping dead are the ones who have now become a liability. So there's also a theory that it is actually the ISI cleaning up his own house. What would you say to that?
I think it's such a mess in terms of the Pakistani. You can say it's a liability. Keep in mind that there is weight in this argument as well. I'm not going to completely, brush this argument away, because keep in mind that the Indians, the Americans, many other Western allies have done a very good job in pressuring the ISI via sanctions in the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, where Pakistan's been on the grey list for several years, just came off last year, the year before that rather. Pakistan had to negotiate for years with the Indians, the Americans, and their friends, and say, listen, this guy who's on your list, he's gone. This guy is arrested. This guy's had a heart attack. This guy has just moved away. He drives a cab now in Monaco, right? So the Pakistanis have tried to be the one thing they're not good at being, which is transparent, right, to themselves and to the Financial Action Task Force. Because the Indians realized, as did the Americans, especially after Mumbai and the follow-up to Mumbai, that the bad guy apparatus is sort of baked into the Pakistani security apparatus. Now you need the Pakistani security apparatus. I think we all agree that the Pakistan army needs to remain a presence in this region for global stability. You can't just disband the army and pretend that the world's fifth largest country will run on its own. So you can't not have the Pakistani military watching over this region in its own way, in its own area of responsibility. But the bad guy apparatus is baked into that apparatus. So the Indians, the Americans, and their friends have figured out quite a unique way, which is to pressure this apparatus through financial sanctions. And it is one of the premises of those sanctions, as you know, Snehesh, as you pointed out, is to say X, Y, and Z who were in Mumbai or Pathankot or Balakot or Puri, they've got to go. And you're like, but they're dead, right? And I've reported on this. For example, one of the founders, one of the masterminds of the Mumbai attacks, Sajid Mir, died in 2011. He died, right? And he's just gone. Janaza wanaza ho gaya, Allahu Akbar ho gaya, har cheez khatam ho gayi, right? But I reported on this that Western intelligence found evidence that he was alive and kicking. And this was my breaking story a couple of years ago for Nikkei, that the Pakistanis were presented with this evidence that, listen, this guy's alive. And then the Pakistanis, played Jesus, raised this guy from the dead, right? Brought him to a trial court where he was much like Jesus. He was tried. And then, of course, he ended up in prison, unlike Jesus, of course. Sorry, I'm making a comparison here. But this guy was raised, and then he came back, and all of a sudden the Pakistanis were rewarded with the sanctions being taken off. So it sort of worked for the Pakistanis to raise this man from the dead. If the Pakistanis can raise terrorists from the dead, Snehesh, for their sanctions, then I'm sure they can kill a few too. So there is a weightage to that argument as well.
Absolutely. But thank you so much, Wajahat, for joining us. It's always a pleasure.